I stood by the bathroom cabinet, fingers grazing empty shelves where my prescriptions used to be. The child I once rocked through fevered nights had stolen the pills that kept my heart steady. "You're better without them," he'd said, smiling like a savior. 40 years of motherhood, erased by one act of control. He thought he was teaching me discipline, but I've balanced ledgers longer than he's been alive, and I know exactly how to calculate revenge. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The morning light sliced through the blinds in slanted, silent stripes. Maggie Holt moved through the kitchen like she always did. Slow, precise, deliberate, her slippers padded across the linoleum as the coffee pot sputtered its last breath. The faint scent of cinnamon toast lingered in the air. But Maggie didn't eat. She had a system, and it always began with her pills. She reached the drawer beneath the calendar, the one with the quiet blue lining and every prescription bottle carefully arranged. Her hand met wood, empty wood. Her eyes narrowed. She opened the drawer beside it, then the cabinet above. She bent low and checked the shelf in the hall closet. Nothing. The entire house felt suddenly foreign, like the walls had shifted overnight. She turned to find Eric leaning against the door frame, coffee mug in hand, a thin smirk playing on his lips. "You don't need those, Mom," he said casually, like he was commenting on the weather. I tossed him. "Consider this tough love." Maggie stared at him, her mouth parting in silent disbelief. Her fingers curled against the edge of the countertop. "They're prescriptions," she said carefully. "Legally dispensed, and necessary." Eric shrugged, sipping his coffee. "I read the side effects. All they do is make you foggy. You're sharper without them." From the living room, Lauren's voice floated in. "He's just trying to help. You know how stubborn you can be." Maggie didn't answer. She moved past them and sat at the table, folding her hands like she was at a wake. The familiar rattle of the pill bottles was gone, but the weight of something heavier had settled in its place. Later that day, Clara Benson arrived with her usual quiet knock and a bag of homemade lemon bars. Maggie opened the door without a word, letting her in like someone welcoming an undertaker. "You look pale," Clara said as she stepped inside, "like something's gone missing." "My medicine," Maggie said, voice low. "Gone." Clara didn't blink. She set the bag down and asked, "Did you misplace it?" "No. He took it. Said I don't need it." Clara's face darkened. "That's not discipline," she snapped. "That's control. That's abuse." "Maggie." The word hung in the air. Heavy. Real. "He thinks he knows better," Maggie whispered. "Says I'm sharper without them. Like he's done me a favor." Clara sat beside her, eyes locked on Maggie's. "You're not imagining this. Don't let them spin it that way." Maggie's hand trembled slightly as she reached for a lemon bar, but didn't take one. Instead, she looked at Clara with a small, unshakable calm, the kind forged from years of silence. "I was a bookkeeper for 40 years, she said softly. "I know numbers. I know patterns. I know how things disappear when no one's looking." She leaned in closer. "And I know how to keep track of what matters." Clara reached across the table, giving Maggie's hand a firm squeeze. "Then you've got the skills. And I've got the fight." Outside, a squirrel scampered along the railing, pausing just long enough to stare through the window. Inside, Maggie stood, her spine straighter than it had been in years. "Eric doesn't believe I can stand without those pills," she said. "Can you?" Clara asked. "I can stand just long enough to bring him down." That evening, Eric stood in the backyard, laughing into his phone. Maggie watched from the kitchen window, unnoticed, the glass cool against her fingertips. "He's gloating," she murmured. Clara looked over her shoulder. "He won't be for long." Maggie turned from the window, her voice no louder than a breath but sharp as a blade. "Then I'll prescribe him something stronger." Maggie slipped on a pair of cotton gloves and opened the latch on the storage chest tucked beneath her bed. The air inside was dusted with time and the soft scent of cedar blocks, but the contents were crisp, untouched. She slid out 3 accordion folders, each thick with receipts, notes and stapled pharmacy printout. He thought age made her soft, forgetful. He didn't know she'd kept every scrap like sacred contracts. She moved slowly but with certainty, laying each folder on the kitchen table in a neat row. There was a method to her madness. Color-coded tabs, date-ordered rows, sticky notes affixed in tiny, elegant print. From the living room, the television blared a game show Eric liked to watch too loudly. He had the volume up again, like he always did when he wanted her to feel small in her own home. Clara arrived mid-morning, arms folded, eyes already locked on the paperwork. "You cataloged all of this?" she asked. Walking over, "I kept records like I kept breath," Maggie replied. "Both matter now." Clara flipped through a few pages, letting the paper flick under her fingers. "You've got the best evidence anyone could ask for. Numbers don't lie, Maggie." "People do." Maggie didn't smile. Her lips stayed tight, eyes focused. "He took my medicine, Clara. But not my memory. I remember every refill date, every dose, every time he told me I was overreacting when I felt off." They packed the files into a canvas tote, zipped it tight, and drove to a small 2-story brick office just off Shadeland Avenue. The nameplate read, "Anthony Rhodes, Attorney at Law." The blinds were tilted half open, letting in slats of sun across a polished oak desk. Anthony Rhodes looked younger than expected, mid-40s, clean-cut and precise in every movement. He listened without interrupting, as Maggie laid the folder on his desk like it held the Constitution. She spoke with care, each word measured like she was balancing her checkbook. "I'm not here to make noise. I'm here to correct a theft." Anthony opened the folders and leaned forward. Page after page passed beneath his eyes. Pharmacy printouts, doctor's notes, Medicare claims, itemized receipts, medication interference. He said after a long silence, "That's what this is. And in your case it could fall under elder abuse and financial coercion if we dig deep enough." "How long has this been going on?" "A while," Maggie replied, "but only now has he taken what keeps me alive." Anthony raised a brow, his tone sharpening. "Then we escalate." Clara, arms crossed, nodded with approval. About time someone in this damn city listened. Maggie reached into her purse and retrieved a small bound notebook. "There's more. Notes, conversations. The day my hands started shaking after he flushed my beta blockers. The morning I blacked out in the pantry and blamed it on the heat. Anthony accepted it like evidence from a courtroom bailiff. You've done the hard part already. Now let me apply pressure. This doesn't just walk into civil court, it marches." As they left the office, a breeze stirred through the parking lot, sending dust across Maggie's shoes. She paused at the passenger door and looked up at the sky. The clouds had started moving. That evening, Eric grilled steaks on the patio, while Lauren tossed together a Caesar salad from a kit. Maggie sat quietly at the table, watching her son laugh with his mouth full. He slapped his stomach and turned to Lauren. "You know Mom doesn't even need her crutches anymore. Guess the pills were making her lazy." Lauren gave a brittle little laugh, as if she weren't sure whether it was a joke or a dig. Maggie didn't look up from her plate. She moved her salad around with a fork, her fingers steady. She didn't speak, but across the table, Clara met her gaze and held it. The steak knife pressed through the meat with an audible scrape, metal gritting against ceramic. Maggie sliced slowly, deliberately, while Eric held court from the head of the table like a man who believed he'd just cured something. "Finally off meds," he announced with a grin. "Clean living's all she needed. Look at her, sharper than she's been in years." Lauren gave a smug little snort, tossing her hair over one shoulder. She actually remembered to turn off the stove yesterday. Progress. Maggie didn't respond. Her hands didn't tremble as they once had. Not because she was better, but because she was measured, calculated. She lifted a forkful of green beans to her mouth and chewed slowly, the garlic and butter a faint background to the bile rising in her throat. The light above the dining table buzzed softly. The room smelled of charred meat, lemon vinaigrette, and the faint synthetic floral of Lauren's overly aggressive plug-in air freshener. "I'll admit," Eric continued, raising his glass, I was skeptical at first, but Mom doesn't need to rely on pills. It was all mental, just needed a push. Maggie smiled faintly, the kind of smile that lived between indifference and knowledge. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin and reached for her water. Across the table, Clara sat unusually still, her wine untouched, her eyes flicked to Maggie's, waiting for the signal. It didn't come, not yet. Across town, Anthony Rhodes sat in his home office, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, fingers typing with clinical precision. A glass of soda fizzed beside his laptop, untouched and sweating into a coaster. The civil complaint had grown teeth. 3 claims already solid: medication interference, willful negligence, and emotional duress. But he wanted more. Needed something to pin financial abuse. He paused, then opened a browser window. Maggie had given him the login info for her Medicare and pharmacy portals, just in case. As he ran a trace on the account's recent activity, something clicked in the back of his mind, a timestamp and IP location. He leaned closer. Well. Back at dinner, Maggie reached for her notebook beneath the table. She'd started keeping it folded in half, pages pre-numbered and labeled by day. Every insult, every controlling comment, catalogued with the precision of a war log. Eric poured himself another glass of wine, oblivious. You know what else, he said, voice thick with confidence. Without all those prescriptions, her moods improved. Less spacey, more obedient. Lauren laughed lightly, but even she flinched at his word choice. Clara's fork hit the table with a soft clink. Obedient, she repeated, voice level. Eric didn't catch the warning. Yeah, it's good for her. Discipline never hurt anyone. Maggie closed her notebook softly. You know, Eric, she said, her voice almost syrupy, you've always been a problem solver. He grinned. That's what I do. I'm just curious, she added, slicing another bite. What problem you think you're solving now? Eric looked up, the grin wavering slightly. Just helping you be your best self, Ma. You'll thank me later. Clara's eyes narrowed. Oh, I think she's already got the thank you planned. Meanwhile, Anthony's screen lit up with a confirmation unauthorized login to Maggie Holt's insurance portal 3 weeks prior, from an IP address tied to Eric Holt's home router. He leaned back in his chair, lips pressed into a slow, satisfied line. Well, he murmured. Looks like someone's playing doctor and data thief. He reached for his phone. Back at the table, Lauren began clearing plates, but Maggie stayed seated. Her notebook now rested beside her glass, one finger marking the next blank page. Her voice was almost lost under the clatter of silverware. You know, Clara, she said, side effects take a little time to show, don't they? Clara didn't look up as she wiped her mouth. Oh yes, she said calmly. But when they hit hard. The hum of the office printer was the only sound in the room, steady and mechanical, like a machine breathing. Anthony Rhodes leaned over the output tray, watching as page after page slid out, each one marked with dates, logins, and digital fingerprints. The faint smell of warm toner filled the air. He flipped through the sheets, eyes narrowing at the IP addresses, then stopped when he reached the smoking gun, an email address tied directly to Eric Holt, used to access Maggie's Medicare portal and authorize changes to her prescription delivery. He didn't speak right away. He just tapped the paper against the desk, aligning the edges, then reached for his phone. Maggie sat at the kitchen table, her mug of tea untouched and cooling. Outside, the wind tapped tree branches against the window pane like a slow ticking clock. Clara sat across from her, flipping through a dog-eared notebook of her own nurse habits die hard. The phone buzzed. Maggie answered on the first ring. Anthony? Her voice was calm but alert. I've got it, he said without preamble. Logins tied to Eric. Not just viewed, Maggie. He modified your prescription records, signed off using your credentials. That's criminal interference. Maggie didn't gasp. She didn't flinch. She pressed her fingertips together and closed her eyes. He wanted control over my prescriptions, she said slowly. Now I control his life. Clara leaned in, catching every word. We're in business? Anthony's voice crackled through the speaker. More than that, I'm filing a civil fraud complaint with his name on it. By the time we're done, he won't be able to borrow a shopping cart without background checks. 2 days later, the insurance company called Maggie directly. She put them on speaker as Clara sat beside her, knitting needles paused mid-stitch. "We've reviewed recent activity on your account," the representative said in a voice too cheerful to belong to fraud investigation. "And we've identified inconsistencies in your prescription fulfillment and billing authorizations. As a precaution, we've suspended future medication reimbursements pending a full review." "What about the claims already processed?" Maggie asked, her voice deceptively pleasant. The rep hesitated. "Several were rerouted to a third-party account. We'll be reaching out formally." Maggie thanked her and hung up. Clara lowered her needles, eyes sharp. "Well," Clara said, "he's about to learn the side effects of messing with the wrong woman." That evening Lauren stormed into the kitchen, her heels clacking like gunshots against the tile. "What the hell did you do?" she snapped at Maggie, waving a stack of papers. Maggie turned slowly from the sink, wiping her hands on a towel. "Something wrong. They denied our last insurance reimbursement," Lauren hissed. "Something about unauthorized access and rerouted claims. Eric said you must have reported it." Maggie didn't answer right away. She folded the towel neatly, her movements slow, deliberate. "I suppose you'll have to start paying for things out of pocket," she said. "Now there's a shock to the system." Lauren's lips curled. "This isn't over." Clara appeared in the doorway behind her. "Actually, honey," she said coolly, "we're just getting started." Back in his office, Anthony filed the formal complaint and uploaded the portal access logs as attachments. He cross-referenced every change, every timestamp, every name. The digital trail told a clear story. Eric had accessed Maggie's insurance account multiple times without consent, rerouting communications, adjusting refill frequencies, and even canceling 2 prescriptions entirely. It wasn't just control. It was calculated, premeditated sabotage. Maggie stared at the printouts laid across her table like puzzle pieces. Clara paced beside her. "People like Eric think paperwork's harmless. They think it's something old women shuffle around when they don't have anything better to do." Maggie tapped one page with her nail. "Paperwork is sharper than scalpels." Clara stopped pacing. "And twice as precise." The printer in Anthony's office spat out the final page. He scanned the confirmation line at the bottom and smiled grimly. A flag had been added to Eric Holt's name. Not internal, not quiet. The insurance company had referred the matter to their legal review board. Anthony Rhodes opened the encrypted file with a calm expression that didn't reach his eyes. The morning sun filtered through his office blinds in thin stripes, striping the floor like prison bars. His assistant hovered near the doorway. "It's all confirmed," she said, voice tight. "Reimbursements in her name. Deposits in his." He exhaled through his nose, steady but slow. "Print everything. Keep duplicates." This just stopped being interference. Across town, Maggie sat at her dining room table, hands folded over a glass of iced water, sweating into a napkin. She didn't tremble. Not anymore. Clara leaned forward with her elbows braced against the table, chin in her hand, watching Maggie closely. Anthony arrived just before noon, files in hand, expression unreadable. He placed a thick manila folder down on the table, flipped it open, and spread the contents out like cards in a gambler's final hand. "Insurance finished their audit," he began. "It goes deeper than portal access. Eric didn't just change prescriptions, he diverted money. Medicare reimbursements meant for you." Maggie blinked once, then again. "Into whose account?" "His," Anthony said flatly. "Your name." "His bank." "For months." A quiet buzz filled Maggie's ears, not rage but clarity, like tuning a station in just right. "This isn't just fraud anymore," Anthony said. "This is theft." Clara let out a short breath. "That little bastard." Maggie leaned in, voice low, almost surgical. "Good, let's overdose him with lawsuits." Anthony filed the complaint that same day. It named Eric Holt as the sole beneficiary of diverted federal health reimbursements, citing elder financial exploitation, insurance fraud, and unauthorized use of protected information under Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act and state statutes. 3 copies went out, one to the state civil court, one to the Department of Insurance, and one directly to the Holt residence. By the time Maggie sat down to her late afternoon tea, Eric's name was already blacklisted by 3 flagged financial institutions. And that was before the media caught wind. Meanwhile, Eric was at poker night, seated around a folding table in his buddy's garage with a cheap cigar in one hand and a can of light beer sweating in the other. The room smelled of motor oil, smoke, and nacho cheese dust. "She's slipping, man," Eric chuckled, flicking his card pile. "Mom won't last much longer. Off the pills now, she doesn't even argue anymore. Damn near manageable." His friends laughed, too busy nursing their own losses to question the venom tucked inside his words. One guy, Dave, cleared his throat. "Thought she used to keep her own finances pretty tight." Eric smirked. "Used to. Not anymore. Everything's streamlined now. Easier when I'm the one making the calls." Another man shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Eric sipped his beer, blissfully unaware that the next envelope headed to his mailbox carried more than a bill. It carried reckoning. The following morning, Maggie sat in her sunroom, a throw blanket over her knees and a cup of hot peppermint tea in her hands. Clara read aloud from her phone, her voice smug. They referred it to the Indiana Department of Insurance, said it met the threshold for malicious intent and probable financial exploitation. Maggie didn't look up. "Does that mean what I think it means?" "It means," Anthony said from the doorway, "we're beyond red tape. The gloves are off." He stepped inside and handed her a single-page document stamped and signed. She adjusted her glasses. "Read it once. Then again." "This is a formal complaint," Anthony said. "Filed today. Elder abuse. Financial theft. Civil damages pending." Clara gave a low, satisfied whistle. "Now it's clinical." Maggie smiled, but it didn't touch her eyes. It was all in the set of her shoulders. In the quiet way, she folded the paper and slipped it into her notebook. Outside, the mail truck rolled to a stop in front of the Holt home. A manila envelope, thick and square-edged, slid into the box. The flag was raised. Back in Anthony's office, the system dinged. "Filing confirmed. Suit active. Date pending." Maggie exhaled, the kind of exhale that didn't ask permission. The sheriff's cruiser coasted to a slow stop in front of the Holt residence, tires whispering over sun-warmed pavement. A few neighbors paused mid-conversation, mid-lawn mow, mid-gossip, eyes drawn to the uniform, stepping out with a thick envelope in hand. The air was thick with humidity and quiet anticipation. Eric opened the front door, wearing mesh shorts and a half-buttoned flannel, holding a coffee mug that read "World's Best Son." The irony arrived a second before the deputy's voice did. "Eric Holt." "Yeah?" Eric blinked, still half asleep. His brow furrowed as the envelope was held out like an offering. "You've been served," the deputy said, professional but not unfriendly. Eric took the papers. The moment he saw Superior Court of Marion County in bold at the top, his mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes scanned the first few lines. Civil complaint, elder financial exploitation, insurance fraud. "What the hell is this?" he snapped. But the sheriff was already walking back to the cruiser. Across the street, old Mr. Dorsey paused while coiling his hose. A young couple with a stroller slowed their walk to a crawl. Curtains shifted in windows like they had lives of their own. Eric stood frozen on the porch, shoes untied, papers trembling in his grip. Then came the explosion. "You've got to be kidding me," he yelled, his voice slicing across the neighborhood like a circular saw. Inside, Lauren was pouring coffee when she heard him. Her shoulders tensed. Moments later, Eric burst into the kitchen, the pages crumpled in his hand. "She filed a lawsuit. A full-blown lawsuit." Lauren didn't meet his eyes. "For what?" He tossed the papers on the counter. "Elder abuse. Insurance fraud. Financial theft. What kind of garbage is this?" Lauren skimmed the top sheet, then glanced away. "You did reroute her reimbursements, Eric. She's my mother. It was for her own. He stopped himself, jaw twitching. I was just managing things. Lauren's silence said what her words didn't. She didn't pick the paper back up. 2 blocks away, Maggie sat in her backyard under the shade of a red umbrella, her tea steeping gently in a ceramic mug. Clara sat opposite her, flipping through a home design magazine she clearly didn't care about. Anthony's call came through right on time. Maggie answered on speaker. "It's done," he said. "Papers were served this morning. Direct delivery." Maggie stirred her tea slowly. "Did he read the charges?" "I imagine he screamed them." Clara smiled without looking up. "First dose delivered." Anthony chuckled on the other end. "Now we wait for the side effects." Maggie took a slow sip of tea, the peppermint rising up into her sinuses, cool and sharp. "They'll hit hard." Back at the Holt house, Lauren had retreated upstairs without a word. Eric paced the living room, the papers spread out across the coffee table like a battlefield. His phone buzzed, Bank of Indianapolis, and he snatched it up. "Yeah?" The voice on the other end was polite but firm. "Mr. Holt, we've received notification of a pending civil suit. As such, we're freezing your individual and joint accounts until further review." Eric's throat went dry. "You can't do that. That's my money." "Not if it's part of the contested restitution, sir." He hung up. Then, breathing fast, he walked to the kitchen, pulled out a legal pad, and began scribbling. Names, accounts, amounts. He had to move money. Now. The next morning, Maggie's phone buzzed again, this time a notification from the financial monitoring service Anthony had insisted she install. She opened the app and stared. Large balance transfer initiated. Eric Holt, A. Lauren Holt. Amount $43,250. Flagged potential asset evasion. Maggie didn't react right away. She simply locked the phone, set it beside her half-eaten toast, and picked up her pen. "Clara," she said, "he's trying to get clever." Clara leaned over her shoulder. "Let's see how clever he feels when the court orders everything reversed." The cursor blinked on the online banking screen like a metronome counting down a final warning. Eric hunched over his laptop at the dining table, eyes locked, fingers tense. The early morning light spilled across the keys as he entered the final routing number, $43,250. All of it. He clicked transfer. Funds moved from his account into the joint one with Lauren. He exhaled slowly as if he'd just neutralized a bomb. "Safe now," he muttered. "Let her chase breadcrumbs." But across the city, inside a sleek, paneled office filled with the faint smell of printer ink and leather polish, Anthony Rhodes already had the alert. The financial monitoring system flagged to any activity related to Eric Holt had pinged at 7:12 a.m. Anthony didn't hesitate. He pulled up a pre-drafted motion and filled in the new transaction ID. "Emergency injunction," he said aloud, pressing send. Within an hour, a judge had approved the freeze on all Holt-linked accounts, including the joint one Lauren had just inherited half ownership of. Back at Maggie's house, the day had just begun. She was dressed early, hair pinned back, cardigan folded over her shoulders like armor. She sipped her morning coffee in silence until Anthony's name lit up her phone screen. "Go ahead," she said. "It's done," Anthony said. "Funds are frozen. Transfer blocked." Maggie closed her eyes briefly, the steam from her mug rising like victory smoke. "Every pill he took away is another dollar I take back." Clara chuckled from the couch, flipping through the newspaper. "We should bottle this kind of vengeance and sell it at pharmacies." Lauren found out first. She stood in front of the ATM outside their credit union, slapping buttons like they owed her money. The screen blinked red. Transaction declined. Account frozen. Contact bank. "What the hell?" she shrieked, drawing looks from a couple walking by. She stormed back into her car and called Eric. "Did you screw up the transfer?" she snapped the moment he answered. Eric was in his garage, panicking mid-oil change, hands black with grease. "No, I made it this morning. It should have landed." "Well, it didn't. Our account's frozen." There was a long, thick silence before Eric responded. "She's faster than I thought." Lauren's voice dropped into something darker. You said we'd be ahead of this. You said you had control. Eric slammed the wrench down. It was supposed to be secure. She didn't respond, not even to hang up. That afternoon, Maggie and Clara met Anthony outside the courthouse steps, the stone still warm from midday sun. He handed Maggie a folded paper. Notice of court date. Civil proceedings confirmed. 3 weeks, he said. That's when he'll answer for everything. Maggie looked down at the date, her fingers steady. He tried to bury me in silence. He forgot I was raised on ledgers and lines that don't lie. Clara looked up from the steps, squinting at a cluster of cameras being set up across the street. Looks like someone else just figured that out. The next morning, the Indianapolis Star ran a half-page local story. Son of retired bookkeeper sued for alleged elder abuse, prescription fraud, and financial exploitation. A blurred photo of Eric outside his house sat just below the headline. His mouth was mid-yell. The caption didn't help. Maggie sat in her armchair, glasses on, slowly folding the paper. I thought he wanted the neighborhood to notice him. Clara across from her grinned over the rim of her coffee cup. This prescription comes with no refills. The courthouse doors groaned open, heavy oak swinging back as Maggie Holt entered, not hurried, not hesitant, but measured. Her cardigan was crisp, pearl buttons secure. She used her old transport chair, not because she had to, but because optics mattered. She wasn't here to seem fragile. She was here to remind them that dignity doesn't wobble, even when bones do. Anthony Rhodes flanked her left, calm and polished in a charcoal suit. Clara walked on her right, eyes alert, shoulders squared like a soldier entering hostile territory. They moved through the marble foyer in silence, heels clicking like metronomes on polished tile. Courtroom 2B. Inside, Eric was already seated at the defense table, legs spread, elbow propped cockily. His tie was loose. His jaw worked a wad of gum like he was at a barbecue, not standing trial for financially gutting his own mother. Lauren sat beside him, overdressed in a tight burgundy dress that creaked every time she shifted. Her jewelry clinked with the same energy as ice cubes rattling in an empty glass. Her smile was brittle, more cosmetic than emotional. She wouldn't meet Maggie's eyes. Maggie, for her part, offered neither glance nor greeting. She didn't need theatrics. The proof was in the folders Anthony now slid onto the plaintiff's table, labeled, tabbed, and dated with the meticulous precision only a bookkeeper could cultivate. The bailiff called order. The judge entered, gray-robed, straight-backed, her glasses perched low and sharp on her nose. She looked at the case file once, then peered over her lenses. Pre-trial hearing Holt v. Holt. Elder abuse and financial exploitation alleged by the plaintiff. Is counsel ready? Anthony stood. We are, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Proceed. Anthony moved with quiet certainty. Your Honor, my client, Margaret Holt, has endured calculated interference in her medical care and financial autonomy, both acts of abuse under Indiana civil statutes. We will demonstrate unauthorized access to health records, forged login credentials, and misappropriated reimbursements totaling over $40,000. He turned to the evidence table. Receipts, portal access logs, financial statements, and sworn testimony. Each document was handed to the bailiff, logged and passed to the judge. The air smelled faintly of ink, paper, and anxiety. Eric leaned toward his attorney, whispering rapidly. His smirk had started to wilt. The judge sifted through the evidence quietly, pausing now and then to raise a brow. Mr. Holt, she said, finally peering toward the defense table, do you have a direct response to the evidence presented? Eric stood and straightened his jacket, but not his tone. It's all been blown out of proportion, Your Honor. She was confused. I stepped in to help. She was losing track of her medications, mismanaging her own files. I didn't steal anything. I was stabilizing things. By rerouting funds? The judge asked. Eric's smile twitched. I was trying to make things easier. The judge glanced at Lauren. And you, ma'am, are you employed? Lauren stiffened. Part-time consulting. Anthony leaned in toward Maggie. Translation, he bankrolled her. Maggie didn't flinch. She just breathed. The judge sat back, reading through the last page slowly. The courtroom was silent, save for the gentle ticking of the clock on the rear wall. She finally closed the folder and set it aside. This evidence exceeds the standard for a formal trial. Based on what I've reviewed, I'm authorizing full proceedings. Discovery will include asset tracing, testimony under oath, and if necessary, independent forensic review of the insurance and financial accounts listed. Eric's jaw clenched. Lauren looked down at her lap. Damages and restitution will be decided at trial, the judge added. But if this documentation holds up, we're talking felony-level civil fraud. Anthony gave a subtle nod. Clara smiled without showing teeth. Maggie simply sat straighter in her chair. As they filed out of the courtroom, Eric threw a glance over his shoulder, quick, uncertain, like a man realizing the tide was pulling faster than he could swim. Maggie didn't look back. The courtroom buzzed like a beehive before smoke. Wooden benches filled quickly. Neighbors, reporters, courthouse regulars who had caught the headline and couldn't stay away. The faint scent of old varnish and paper hung in the air, thickened by anticipation. Maggie sat upright in her chair, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her lavender blouse was freshly pressed, her pearls modest, her spine unbending. Clara was behind her, lips drawn tight but proud, while Anthony stood at the ready, flipping through a yellow legal pad one last time. Across the aisle, Eric slouched in a navy suit too crisp to be honest. His smirk had dulled into a performative grimace. Lauren beside him wore dark sunglasses indoors, lips glossy and tight. She clutched her purse like a lifeline. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered, same black robe, but her gaze carried new weight. This was no longer a review. This was trial. Anthony rose first. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice cutting through the stillness, "you'll hear that my client, Margaret Holt, lost access to her life-sustaining medication, her financial autonomy and her dignity, not through error, not through miscommunication, but through the willful acts of her son Eric Holt." He turned to the jury. "She lost her prescriptions. He lost his integrity." He let the line hang in the air, then returned to the evidence table, and began unpacking the damage, one exhibit at a time. Dated pharmacy receipts, showing canceled refills. Login credentials linked to Eric's IP address. Emails rerouting financial reimbursements. A notarized medical statement showing health decline correlating with withheld medication. The jury leaned in. Pens moved. Heads turned toward Maggie. Eric's attorney tried to paint him as concerned, misunderstood, and overwhelmed by caregiving duties. But his own face betrayed the spin. Too smug, too rehearsed. And when Lauren took the stand, the air shifted. She started firm, parroting Eric's version of events. "We noticed Maggie forgetting things. She'd double-dose, miss meals, skip her pills." Eric stepped in to help. Anthony waited. Then gently, without accusation, pulled out an exhibit marked Exhibit Q3, a text message Lauren sent 3 months prior to her sister. "If Eric doesn't get Maggie's checks again this month, I'm canceling the pool guy." Lauren's smile cracked. That was taken out of context. "You're under oath, Mrs. Holt." Her lips quivered. "I didn't mean it literally." But the jury had heard it. Then came Maggie. Anthony helped her to the stand. She didn't speak quickly. She didn't need to. "My son thought he could play doctor," she said, her voice calm but grave. "He decided what I should and shouldn't take. Then he took the money to reward himself for it." One juror, a mother in her 50s, swallowed hard. Another tilted his head, visibly uncomfortable. Maggie held nothing back. "I shook," she continued. "My heart raced. I fainted in my pantry, and while I wondered if I was dying, he was cashing reimbursement checks behind my back." Silence followed, not out of awkwardness, but reverence. The judge recessed for deliberation. It took the jury just over an hour. When they returned, the foreman stood, papers in hand, voice clear. "We find the defendant, Eric Holt, liable for elder financial abuse, fraudulent conversion of funds, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." Eric's shoulders dropped. Lauren turned away, blinking rapidly. The judge's voice was swift and final. "You will pay restitution totaling $87,000. You will forfeit any assets gained through diverted reimbursements, and this court will authorize seizure of all relevant accounts until payment is fulfilled. Eric's mouth opened as if to object, but no words came out. Maggie didn't blink. Outside, reporters crowded the courthouse steps, flashes popped, microphones were raised, questions flew. Anthony blocked them with a hand and guided Maggie through the crowd. Clara followed behind, a rare smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Does this mean it's over?" Maggie asked quietly, as they neared the parking lot. Anthony didn't answer right away. He just held open the car door. "No," he finally said. "It means now we collect." The court's ruling echoed louder outside the courtroom than it had inside. Headlines spun across local news channels like fire through dry grass. Words like restitution, asset seizure, an elder justice served replaced the smirking spin Eric had once used to control the narrative. Now he wasn't speaking. He was bleeding, financially, legally, socially. Within 72 hours of the verdict, every account with Eric Holt's name attached was frozen, drained, or legally redirected. The sheriff's department delivered the judgment paperwork personally, flanked by a court-appointed auditor and a very quiet bank representative. When they arrived at the Holt residence, Eric opened the door in gym shorts and a college sweatshirt, the color already draining from his face before the words asset collection were even spoken. The sheriff handed him the writ. "You have 5 minutes to open access to your files. We're executing a court-ordered lien on the property and all primary accounts tied to the restitution." Lauren stood behind him, arms crossed, eyes burning. "What does that mean?" she snapped. "It means," the auditor said, without looking up from his clipboard, "this house is no longer just yours." At her own kitchen table, Maggie sat with pen in hand, reviewing the transfer forms Anthony had delivered that morning. The sun spilled through the window in wide golden stripes, warming the edge of the wooden table where she'd once organized monthly budgets, insurance files, and grocery lists. This time the numbers were for her. Anthony tapped the final page. "The restitution and damages are being secured through a protective trust. It'll shield the funds from any future claims or appeals. It's yours and it stays that way." Maggie signed with steady hands. "Consider it your long-term care insurance," Anthony added. "Written by the very man who tried to strip you of care." She leaned back. "This prescription is permanent." From across the table, Clara grinned and set down her glass of sweet tea. "And it's working beautifully." At the Holt house, the seizure team moved fast. 2 court officers cataloged valuables, laptops, jewelry, an untouched designer purse Lauren had once bragged about getting half off, but paid full price for with Maggie's stolen reimbursements. Eric paced behind them, fuming, arms crossed so tightly his knuckles turned white. "You can't just walk in here and take everything." "I have rights." "You had rights," the lead officer replied. "Now you have obligations." Lauren exploded. "This is ridiculous. She's just bitter and old. That money wasn't even hers by the time we used it." "That's enough," the officer snapped. "You can take your complaints to the appeals board. But you're still leaving with less than you walked in with." Lauren let out a raw, furious scream and stormed out the front door, slamming it behind her so hard the wreath fell off. Eric stood alone in the foyer, silent now, sweat dotting his temples. Later that day, Maggie met Anthony at the local credit union to finalize the account for the trust. The clerk behind the glass was young, polite, visibly impressed when she saw the judge's order being referenced. "I don't mean to pry," the clerk said as she printed the account summary, "but it's rare to see restitution this solidly enforced." Maggie smiled faintly. It's rare to be underestimated so completely. When she left the bank, the air smelled of new rain on hot concrete. Clara waited in the car, the radio playing soft jazz. "All set?" she asked. Maggie nodded, stepping in. "Every penny he touched is back under lock and key." That evening, the sheriff returned to the Holt residence, this time alone, with a single sheet of paper, plastic wrapped and stapled to a bright red notice. He hammered it to the porch post at eye level. Notice of foreclosure, per order of Marion County Civil Court. Effective immediately. Inside, Eric sat on the floor of his living room, TV muted, lights off. He didn't get up when the hammering started. He didn't move when it stopped. Outside, neighbors passed by a little slower. The hammering started just after 9 a.m. One loud strike, then another. Each thud echoed down the street like a warning bell. By the time the sheriff stepped back and smoothed the red foreclosure notice flat against the front post, the neighbors had already begun to gather, pretending to water their lawns, walking dogs that didn't need walking, carrying empty coffee cups they weren't drinking from. The Holt house stood stripped of its former pride, curtains half torn, paint chipped near the porch rail. The front lawn, once trimmed with manicured precision by a service Maggie had unknowingly paid for, was now patchy and yellowing. Eric stood in the doorway, arms limp at his sides, watching the sheriff leave without another word. The weight of that red paper seemed to tilt the whole house forward. Inside, the boxes were already stacking up. Lauren stormed between rooms like a wind-up toy out of control, tossing clothes, yanking cords, muttering threats under her breath. "You said this wouldn't happen," she hissed, waving a jewelry box over her head. "You told me everything was handled." Eric crouched over a banker's box, slowly wrapping a picture frame of the two of them in newspaper. "I didn't know she'd take it this far." Lauren laughed, sharp, hollow. "She didn't take it anywhere. You gave it to her, one login at a time." She dropped the box and stood over him. "I'm not doing this. I didn't marry into foreclosure." Eric looked up, tired. "You didn't marry into consequences either. But here we are." Her purse was slung over her shoulder before the sentence ended. 3 blocks down, Maggie's car rolled by slow, steady, windows down. Clara sat in the passenger seat, sunglasses perched, arms crossed, eyes forward. Maggie didn't gawk. She didn't wave. She simply glanced once, then returned her eyes to the road. Calm, measured, unshakable. Clara, however, took it all in. The boxes, the scowl, the neighbors pretending not to stare. Then she gave a quiet, satisfied nod. "This looks cleaner than any medicine shelf I've ever seen." Maggie didn't answer, but her fingers, resting on the steering wheel, tapped once against the leather, just one steady heartbeat of quiet triumph. That afternoon, Anthony sat at his desk downtown, finalizing the paperwork. The auction from the seized property. Electronics, furniture, even the riding mower Eric had once bragged about, had generated enough to cover the first installment of Maggie's restitution. Anthony faxed the court-confirmed payout sheet, initialed it, then made the call. "It's official," he said when Maggie picked up. "The sale went through. Funds are locked and delivered." "Good," she said. "Let's make sure he feels it every time he opens a drawer and finds it empty." Back at the now bare Holt residence, Eric stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by boxes and silence. No TV, no furniture, no wife, only a yellow envelope sat on the floor near the kitchen, unopened. When he finally did open it, the contents were short and brutal. Notice of bankruptcy eligibility. Assets insufficient. Income frozen. Filing advised immediately. Eric sat in the cold fluorescent light of the bankruptcy trustee's office, sweat sticking to the back of his shirt like a consequence he couldn't shake off. The carpet was gray, the chairs were steel-framed and stiff, and the air smelled faintly of toner and defeat. He'd worn a suit jacket out of habit, but the sleeves felt too long now, like they belonged to someone who used to matter. A low-pitched voice called his name from behind a frosted glass door. "Mr. Holt?" He stood, nodded, stepped inside, and watched as the trustee slid a single stapled packet across the table. "All debts discharged. Accounts frozen. No further claimable assets." A pause. "It's official." The words hit harder than any courtroom sentence had. This wasn't just a judgment. It was surrender. By the time Eric returned to his rented studio apartment, an upstairs unit above a vape shop that smelled like burnt cherry and old drywall, Lauren's half of the closet was empty. The drawers were open. The bathroom counter was cleared. On the small dining table sat a handwritten note, 2 lines long. This isn't what I signed up for. Don't call me. He didn't sit down. He didn't move. He just stood in the doorway, reading it twice, then folding it once and sliding it into his back pocket like something worth keeping. Meanwhile, across the city, Maggie Holt stood at her kitchen counter with an envelope in her hand, thicker than usual, cream-colored, addressed in clean block letters from the state's civil enforcement agency. She opened it slowly, carefully, as Clara and Anthony watched from the dining table. Inside, the first official restitution check. $61,847.68, made out directly to Margaret Holt. No delays, no conditions, no appeals. Anthony set down his glass and leaned back in his chair. That's it. No more hearings, no more surprises. His bankruptcy protects him from collectors, but not from the judgment, not from you. Maggie nodded, fingers resting on the check like she was absorbing its weight through her skin. Clara stood up, already tying her apron. You know what this calls for? Maggie raised an eyebrow. Celebration meatloaf. Extra glaze, no shortcuts, only the real thing. The house filled with the savory scent of ketchup, onions, and butter-soaked breadcrumbs. Clara moved through the kitchen like a woman on a mission, pots clanging, oven door creaking. Maggie set the table, candles lit, cloth napkins folded, like this was a ritual worth honoring. And it was. As they ate, laughter returned to Maggie's voice, not loud or theatrical, but the kind that came from a place that had been locked up for too long. Even Anthony smiled wider than usual, rolling up his sleeves and asking for seconds. I never thought I'd say this, he muttered between bites, but that meatloaf's better than a closing argument. Clara beamed. That's because you've never been this hungry for justice before. Maggie just smiled faintly and reached for another spoonful of potatoes. Later that night, Maggie stood alone in the hallway, studying the family photos lining the wall. Some frames had been removed. Eric's graduation, his wedding, the beach trip he'd mocked her through, but the space didn't feel empty. It felt reclaimed. She didn't need to fill the gaps. She had room to breathe. The next morning, Maggie's phone buzzed against the table as she buttered toast. The screen lit up with a headline from the Indianapolis Star. Son convicted of prescription fraud against elderly mother. Bankruptcy follows civil judgment. Beneath it, a photo of Eric leaving the courthouse, face pale, shoulders hunched, background blurred. Clara, reading over her shoulder, let out a low whistle. Front page justice. That's a first. Maggie nodded, sipping her tea. He always wanted to be the center of attention. The donation check slid across the desk like a quiet blade. Maggie didn't say much as she handed it to the director of the Central Indiana Elder Justice Alliance. She wore a blue blazer, simple pearls, and her quiet fire tucked behind reading glasses. The director, a gray-haired woman with sleeves rolled and eyes sharp, blinked at the number, then looked up. This is unexpected, she said. Maggie offered a faint smile. So was waking up with my prescriptions missing. I figured I'd balance the scale. By the end of the week, Maggie's name had been added to the Alliance's donor wall, under legacy benefactors, right between a retired judge and a pharmaceutical CEO. But she didn't care about plaques. She cared about patterns, and hers had finally broken by her own hand. Local media caught wind of her gift. The same outlets that had plastered Eric's conviction across headlines now ran profiles on the bookkeeper who beat elder fraud, interviews, photo spreads, even a televised segment where she sat beside Clara on a shaded bench and spoke in clipped, unwavering sentences about dignity, autonomy, and the steep cost of underestimating quiet women. Meanwhile, Eric couldn't get a job. Not at the bank, not at the car lot, not even at the liquor store down the street. His background checks lit up like a warning flare. Neighbors crossed the street when they saw him. Former poker buddies stopped returning his calls. Someone tagged Taff in red spray paint on the mailbox at his rental. He painted over it twice. It came back the third time. The overdraft fees were the final insult. Lauren didn't send divorce papers with a lawyer. She left them on the front porch, wedged under a broken potted plant with a sticky note. Your poison. I'm done. Eric signed them on the same chipped countertop where he'd once bragged about streamlining Maggie's life. No one came to witness it. Back in Maggie's kitchen, Clara set down a fresh pitcher of iced tea with a smirk. You know I've been a nurse a long time, prescribed a lot of meds, but this, she gestured to the growing folder of thank you letters from seniors around the city. This is the strongest prescription you ever wrote. Maggie folded one of the letters and tucked it away. And the only one he'll never refill. The room was quiet for a moment, filled only with the ticking of the clock and the soft whirl of the ceiling fan. Justice had its own rhythm. And now, finally, Maggie moved to it. That night she sat at her desk, small wooden, the same one she'd used to track every penny Eric had taken, and opened a new notebook. She smoothed the first page flat, and clicked a pen into place. At the top, in steady, even letters, she wrote prescriptions for justice, how I survived my son and took back my life. She paused, then added a subtitle. One bottle, one receipt, one court date at a time. Clara passed behind her, saw the title, and stopped. You're writing it. Maggie didn't look up. I'm just starting with the dosage. The applause came like rainfall, soft at first, then building in waves. Maggie stood behind the podium, fingers resting lightly on the edge, eyes scanning the modest crowd gathered inside the Indianapolis Civic Center ballroom. No spotlight, no red carpet, just warm lights, folding chairs, and the unmistakable hush of respect. She'd been introduced as Margaret Holt, retired bookkeeper, survivor of financial abuse and advocate for elder autonomy. But in this moment, she wasn't defined by survival. She was defined by what she'd built after. To her left, a projection screen showed a photo from the newspaper, her sitting outside the courthouse, head high, next to the headline, Mother Wins Justice, Son Convicted in Landmark Elder Abuse Case. To her right, Clara sat beaming in the front row, dabbing the corner of her eye with a folded napkin. She wore a new blouse, a gift from Maggie, and the pride in her posture was impossible to miss. Behind them, Anthony stood near the back, arms crossed, chin raised, nodding slightly every time someone whispered, "That's her attorney." When Maggie stepped down from the podium, Anthony approached with a certificate and a handshake. "You didn't just hold your ground," he said, handing it over. "You drew the line for everyone behind you. Let's hope they never have to cross it," Maggie replied. He smiled. "Your story's already doing the heavy lifting." A woman in her 60s stepped forward with her daughter and clutched Maggie's hand. "Because of you, I called my bank. My son had been helping with my accounts too. He's not anymore." Maggie nodded gently. Help should never come with strings. Outside, twilight bled into the trees as the event wound down. Maggie stood on the center steps of the building as a gentle breeze lifted the hem of her blouse. The scent of fresh-cut grass and distant barbecue from a nearby park drifted through the air. A familiar voice called out, "Grandma." She turned to see her two grandchildren, Jake 15 and Lila 12, running toward her with their mother trailing just behind. Jake grinned as he reached her. "Mom said you beat up Grandpa in court." Lila chimed in, wide-eyed. "You're famous." Maggie laughed, wrapping her arms around both. "I didn't beat him up, sweetheart. I just told the truth louder than he could lie." Her daughter stepped forward and hugged her tightly. "You gave us all something to stand on, Mom." Later that week, Maggie sat at her kitchen table surrounded by folders and post-it notes, not evidence this time, but investment portfolios and trust planning guides. She flipped through them with the same precision she once reserved for balancing household books. Her settlement was safe, structured smartly, divided across trusts, savings, and modest investment, enough to ensure she'd never again be dependent on anyone's idea of help, enough to leave a legacy that couldn't be tampered with. Clara entered carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You know," she said, setting one down, "when we met, I thought you were quiet." Maggie looked up. "I was." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Not anymore." They laughed together, easy, unguarded. Meanwhile, Eric Holt's name had vanished. His face no longer appeared in search results beyond archived court reports. He lived in a shared two-bedroom rental out by the city's edge, occasionally seen loading pallets at a warehouse under someone else's authority. His neighbors didn't know who he was. His former poker friends had new circles, and Lauren, last anyone heard, she was living in Cincinnati and had changed her last name back. He was no longer feared, no longer listened to, just gone. Back at home, Maggie stood in front of the bathroom mirror and opened a small wooden cabinet. Inside was a brand new lockbox, chrome-plated, fingerprint secured. Inside, her prescriptions, each properly labeled, counted and protected. She ran her finger along the edge of the lid, then closed it with a quiet click. From the hallway, Clara called out, "You locking up again?" Maggie smiled to herself. "Just making sure the only hands touching my pills are mine." The river moved like memory, slow, steady, unbothered by what came before it. Maggie sat on the overlook bench beneath the sycamores, hands folded in her lap, watching the surface shimmer as the wind rolled across it, like fingers through silk. The sun hung low behind her, casting gold over the water. Beside her, Clara sipped from a thermos of lukewarm coffee and said nothing, because silence sometimes said everything. Maggie inhaled deeply. Earthy air, river stones, wildflowers blooming just below the railing. Not a siren, not a demand, not a locked drawer in sight. This was peace, earned and completely her own. Her phone buzzed once in her coat pocket. She pulled it out and saw Anthony Rhodes flash across the screen. She answered with a quiet yes, no appeals, no loopholes. "He's out of options," Anthony said. The wind muffled his voice, but not his certainty. "I just got official notice. Eric can't refile, countersue, or reclaim assets. The case is closed." Maggie's eyes stayed on the river. "For good?" "For good," he said. Then a pause. "You turned this case into precedent, Maggie. You didn't just win. You wrote the script for every woman who'll come next." She didn't cry. She didn't cheer. She simply nodded, the corners of her mouth rising in a quiet, earned curve. "Thank you," she said, "for not underestimating me." "I never did," Anthony replied. He did. They ended the call. Clara leaned back with a sigh and cracked her neck. "So that's it? Really over?" Maggie nodded once. "It's not about what ended. It's about what began." Clara smirked. "You thinking about writing another book?" Maggie glanced sideways. "I'm thinking about writing a new will." Clara's eyebrows lifted. "Oh?" Later that afternoon, Maggie sat at her desk with her estate planner, a calm woman in her 40s who spoke like a surgeon, precise, firm, focused. The old will sat beside a fresh draft. Names were adjusted, clauses rewritten. Eric's name, once listed as secondary executor, was nowhere to be found. Jake and Lila, her grandchildren, had been elevated to equal beneficiaries under a protected trust. Education, first homes, healthcare, in that order. She initialed every page in steady, slanted cursive. When the planner slid the final page toward her, Maggie paused with the pen. Then she signed. The next day she walked alone to the bank, her gait slow but sure, a wheeled walker beneath her hands, new lockbox keys dangling from the handle. She deposited the final restitution check into an account marked IBAN Dependent Living Fund. No co-signers, no hidden transfers. As she stepped out into the sunlit parking lot, she stopped for a moment beside a small maple tree planted near the curb. It had only just begun to bloom. A man held the door open for her on the way out. "Afternoon, ma'am." She smiled. "It is now." Back home, Clara had the kettle on, and a stack of mail spread across the table. Maggie returned to her favorite chair by the window, cracked it open just a bit, and listened to the breeze rustle the nearby hedges. Her prescriptions were now stored in a wall-mounted biometric safe, accessible only by her fingerprint. She kept the keycard backup tucked inside her nightstand, right behind her copy of Prescriptions for Justice, which had already found its way into 3 book clubs and 1 local university syllabus. Clara handed her a cup of chamomile tea. "You realize you've become a movement, right?" Maggie chuckled. "I didn't ask to be one." "No," Clara said. "You just prescribed exactly what this town needed." Maggie took a long sip, feeling the warmth settle in her chest like a slow ember. Best prescription I ever wrote. They sat there as the evening rolled in, quiet, familiar, peaceful, the kind of peace you don't inherit, the kind you write for yourself. Maggie looked out the window, eyes calm, voice barely above a whisper. He hid my prescriptions to teach me a lesson, so I prescribed him court dates,